vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hi, this is Dick Shanley, and for the next hour I'll be reading from Sunday, March 29th issue of the New York Times Opinion section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. This article was written by Jamel Bowie. When a narcissist goes to war. If you can set aside both the unconstitutionality and the immorality of President Trump's unprovoked war on Iran and focus on the operation itself, it's hard not to be bewildered by the other lack of planning or even basic strategic thinking that has gone into it. Trump and his aides, according to recent reporting, did not plan for Iran to target shipping and close the Strait of Hormuz. They also do not seem to have planned for serious and sustained retaliation against America's Gulf state allies. They did not plan for an energy crisis and the potential disruption of the global economy. And they did not plan for America's European allies, by and large, reject their call for support. It appears that both the President and the White House expected token resistance, followed by the collapse of the Iranian regime, the installation of a pro-American government, or at least one we could tolerate, and a return to the status quo ante, a replay, in essence, of the President's first intervention of the year in Venezuela. Now that this replay fantasy has collided with more complex, indeterminate, and difficult reality, Trump is unable to explain his objectives or even give the country a sense of when the war might end. He told Fox News Radio that he would feel it in my bones. Let's just say that this is a far cry from traditional political leadership during wartime. If anything, Trump is caught in a classic recalculation spiral. When one approach fails, in the case of the initial airstrikes, he moves to the next. When that fails, he bids higher. And when escalation doesn't produce the desired results, when he faces a choice between accepting defeat or stalemate or going even further, he goes further. Which is how we've arrived closer and closer to the use of ground troops. It should be said that at no point has Congress either authorized the war or provided funding for ground installations. For his part, the President is either bragging about a forthcoming agreement, they're going to make a deal, he said, of Iranian leaders in a news conference on Tuesday, or threatening attacks on Iran's civilian infrastructure. If I want to take down the power plant, that very big power plant, they can't do a thing about it, Trump said during the same news conference. What's striking is how familiar this pattern feels. The administration did not expect the public to be repelled by DOGE. It did not expect outrage over the treatment of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. It did not expect Democrats to respond to the threats of partisan gerrymandering with their own push to wring as many Democratic seats as possible out of the so-called blue states. The administration certainly did not expect a mass mobilization against the deployment of National Guard troops and the use of immigration and customs enforcement and customs and border protection as a roving parliamentary force. Minnesota in particular appears to have caught them entirely off guard. A tendency toward docility, it seems, is the base assumption about everyone they oppose. Which raises another key question. Why can't the White House see what others could have easily predicted? None of this should have been a surprise. Anyone capable of thinking through the actions of other people, of imagining the perspectives and recognizing that they have agency, should have been able to anticipate these outcomes and plan accordingly. And in the case of the war in Iran, the president ignored counsel that warned of something like the current situation. This gets to the real problem. Trump is famously indifferent to the concerns of those around him. He's a consummate narcissist, and he is, without question, the most solipsistic person ever to occupy the office. An editorial comment. I've never heard the, well, I'll spell it and see if I can pronounce it for you. Solipsistic. Solipsistic. I have no idea what that means. I'll look it up later. Every presidential administration takes on the character of its principal, and this one is no different. Like Trump, the White House does not seem to understand that other people have agency too. It sees itself the same way the president sees himself. It's a protagonist of the universe, with everyone else acting as a supporting character or a non-player. Extras who have no will of their own. And so, whenever other people do act of their own accord, both the president and the administration find themselves flat-footed. For their opponents, this is an opportunity. The White House inability to grasp the agency of others gives Democrats especially a distinct advantage. They can seize the initiative knowing that the president will struggle to respond in a constructive way. By virtue of his position, Trump is a dangerous figure, but he's also a weak and deeply unpopular president. The upshot of his impenetrable egotism for his opponents is that there are plenty of opportunities to make him weaker and even more unpopular. For as much as he is in love with violence, for as much as he dearly wants to terrorize the nation into admission, he is also cursed with a kind of blindness. He cannot see that his opposition is real. He cannot see that it can act. The next article is written by Nicholas Kristof. President Trump, slow your roll. I was a child during the Vietnam War and will remember anti-war protests. I recall a common sentiment that best expressed by Senator George McGovern. I'm tired of old men dreaming up wars for young men to fight. And here we go again. President Trump has reached a fork in his Iran war. One path would be diplomatic, and Trump has tried to reassure financial markets that we're headed way. Iran is begging us to make a deal, he claimed. The problem is that Iran is not in fact begging for a deal. On the contrary, it has found fabulous leverage by closing the Strait of Hormuz to most traffic other than its own. Iranians must be thinking that they largely gave up their nuclear program in accord with President Barack Obama, and they got a measly $400 million for that. Later there was more. This month, all Iran had to do was block the Strait of Hormuz for a few weeks, and the Trump administration lifted the sanctions that could amount to $14 billion. No wonder Iran seems to feel it has the upper hand. So while Trump may want an off-ramp, his condom is that any deal now would be worse than the Iran's reported offer last month, a 3-year pause in all uranium enrichment and strict limits thereafter. I'm in favor of the diplomatic path, but let's be honest. Any deal would be a pretty bad one and would strengthen a brutal regime that oppresses its people and menaces the region. Because the diplomatic option is so unappealing, Trump seems poised to seize an even worse one, dispatching ground troops to invade Iran. He is sending thousands of Marines and paratroopers in the region, and the Wall Street Journal reports that Pentagon is considering whether to send another 10,000 ground troops. This is a dangerous point, Vali Nasser, a veteran Iran watcher at Johns Hopkins University, told me. Maybe Trump has no choice but to go down this path, because to table right now would really admit defeat, but this is a cadre of his own making. The most discussed target for seizure is Karg Island, Iran's primary oil export base. Yes, the Marines probably could conquer Karag, even though the Iranians have reportedly laid traps and improved defenses. As Senator Lindsey Graham, the Trump's whispers it, we did Iwo Jima, we can do this. What Graham didn't mention was 26,000 Americans were killed or wounded capturing the Japanese island of Iwo Jima near the end of World War II. The challenge just isn't seizing Karg. The greater nightmare would be protecting troops there day after day, week after week from drones and other attacks. The United States has been able to fully protect its own hardened military base in the region as much greater distances from Iran, forcing soldiers to evacuate to hotels. Many of the 13 military bases in the region used by American troops are all but uninhabitable, said Times colleague Helene Cooper and Eric Schmidt reported. So if we can't protect the bases, how will you protect Marines dropped off in an Iranian island? Why seize Karg anyway? The theory advanced by Hawks is that without oil revenues, Iran could be forced to surrender. Control that island and let the regime die on a vine, urged Graham. Unfortunately, that theory is probably wrong. Even if we take Karg, Iran won't capitulate, Denis Citrinovich, formerly the top Iran watcher in Israel Defense Intelligence, told me. And everything's going to escalate, and the price of oil and whatever it will be dramatically higher. Iran will most likely retaliate by attacking energy infrastructure around the region, and more terrifying, destination plants that provide the water on which some Gulf cities depend. With refineries out of commission, we could face oil and gas shortage for years to come. The Houthis in Yemen might also join the fray by blocking ship traffic through the Bab at Manaba Strait, which is the Red Sea choke point equivalent to Hormuz and the Persian Gulf. Trump's aim, if he dispatches ground troops, is probably to escalate to de-escalate, hoping that he can gain leverage over Iran and get a better bargain. That's possible, but my guess is the opposite. Collapsing financial markets would give Iran even more leverage than it has now. Remember that after Iraq invaded Iran in 1980, Iran recovered its territory by 1982, but was so enraged that it refused a ceasefire and spent another 6 years fighting to the hope of overthrowing the Iraqi regime. Do we have the same staying power? For all of the uncertainties, one truth I feel deeply from having seen war up close. Old men should not fix their messes by dispatching young men to die in unnecessary wars. Next article is written by Maureen Dowd. Trump does all he wants and more. Donald Trump used to brag about grabbing women by the crotch. Now he's grabbing the world by its axis. He still believes that he has the right to swoop in with transgressive attack. He has simply expanded his targets. When you're a star, he once said, they let you do it. You can do anything. His approach in his second term can be described as manhandling, abetted by his cabinet of lackeys and congressional Republican bootlickers. Mike Johnson pathetically conjured an American First Award for Trump out of thin air. The House Speaker called the beautiful golden statue of an eagle appropriate to the new golden era in America. Trump thinks more than ever that he can have his way whatever he wants in whatever way he wants, whether it's in a country, a skyline, the White House. He accosted the People's House, bulldozing the East Wing, a Jackie Kennedy guard, before anyone could even look at the plans. He blows up suspected drug boats, snatched Nicolas Maduro out of his bedroom, and salivates at the thought of pillaging Greenland and assailing Cuba. I do believe I'll be having the honor of taking Cuba, he said. That's a big honor, taking Cuba in some form. Whether I free it or take it, I think I can do anything I want with it. You want to know the truth? You can do anything. At a cabinet meeting on Thursday, an amused Trump mused, I think I may go to Venezuela and run for president against Delcy, referring to Delcy Rodriguez, Maduro's vice president, who was Senate with Trump's approval. On Monday, troops said that if Iran did not submit to him, he'll just keep bombing our little hearts out. He was steaming that NATO was not bending to his will, and he vowed that that would rue the day. This was a test for NATO, he said, during a cabinet meeting. If you don't do that, we're going to remember. Just remember this is a number of months from now. Remember my statements. They have an expression, a great expression. Never forget. You can never forget. It's odd that Trump co-opted the bracing slogan about 9/11, given the day he observed that with the Twin Towers coming down, one of his buildings, 40 West, became the tallest in Lower Manhattan. Once, Trump thought war was a waste of time and lives and money. He dreamed of building hotels on the beaches of North Korea and Gaza. After he beat Hillary Clinton in 2016, he gave a speech outlining his military policy. We will stop racing to topple foreign regimes that we know nothing about, that we shouldn't be involved with, he said. Now he lusts for regime change. Cadet Bone Spurs has developed a taste for flaunting our unparalleled military, and there's no one in the Pentagon to curb this news approach for global violence. Certainly not the aggro Pete Hegseth. Hegseth showed, again, why it is such unnerving choice to run our military when he blocked the promotion of 2 black officers and 2 women to become 1-star generals. It's a Times scoop that left a gaggle largely of white men, Hegseth's favorite breed, on the promotional list. When Trump was a celebrity development, people laughed at his megalomania in plastering his name everywhere. He grabbed building by the crotch, but now he is president. And it's not funny. It's foul. He forced his name onto the Kennedy Center. He scratched the U.S. out of the U.S. Institute of Peace and made it the Donald J. Trump Institute of Peace. He is branding his name on a class of battleships. A multi-story banner of his glowing face hangs from the Department of Justice. He tried to have Washington Dulles Airport in New York's Penn Station named after him, and is plotting a Trump-style arch across from the Lincoln Memorial, so tall it will interfere with Reagan National Airport flight paths. Trump handpicked art commissioners, approved the creation of a commemorative 24-karat gold coin with a scowling picture of the president leaning over a desk with his fist clenched, and King Midas impelling the Treasury Department to mint a $1 coin with his visage. Now, in his frenzied quest for ubiquity, he will deface U.S. currency. The Treasury Department announced on Thursday that Trump will become the first sitting president to have his signature on paper money, thrusting himself into legal tender as anything but tender. He's showing the U.S. Treasury signature off the bills. Naturally, Trump put a symphonic man in that job, ending a 76-year stretch of women holding it. The president's mark on history as the architect of America's golden age economic revival is undeniable, said Brandon Beach, the treasurer, in a statement. Putting his signature on the American conservative is not only appropriate, but well-deserved. As everyone tries to make sense of his more belligerent Trump, just remember, he still access Hollywood Trump. He continues his immoral, pseudo macho posturing, but just with a bigger stage and the biggest weapons. Whether you like Trump or whether you dislike Trump, it seems a bit strong that everything should be changed vis-a-vis the dollar bill, vis-a-vis building arches. The casino that's eating the world. Last month, as American forces gathered in the Middle East, in obvious preparation for an attack in Iran, you could have made a small fortune gambling on when exactly the bombing would begin. One user on the prediction site, Polymarket, where you can wager on an increasing large share of human events from the trivial to the tragic, made $553,000 on bets, placed right after Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah al-Khamenei was killed by U.S. illy-strikes. Another use was quickly flagged by an observer on X as having made $2.14 million by placing bets on different aspects of the military operation. In another context, these bets would trigger an insider trading investigation, and indeed someone in the Iranian military might well have treated the bets as a form of actionable intelligence. But what is the average American meant to do with this kind of news, observing that a big spike in betting activity and guessing it might be well mean someone inside information sending a clear sign? One intuitive answer would be, bet on it yourself. What's the point of knowing anything after all if you don't have some skin in the game? This kind of proposition used to seem to many obviously grotesque, but increasingly it seems stitched unmistakably into the cardship of American life. In theory, prediction markets are pretty straightforward. They can online marketplaces where people can buy and sell stakes in futures of various kinds, much as they might trade stocks. This month, for instance, for 92 cents, you could have bought a future that paid off $1 if the Ryan Gosling movie Project Hail Mary, which opened on March, had a Rotten Tomatoes score of 93%, positive or higher in the morning of March 23rd. For 8 cents, you could have bought one that paid off $1. If that didn't happen, the score ended up being 95%, and those holding the future collectively take more than $2 million home. Each market sustains trading on those futures, and the result is collectively only a collective force of future outcome. When a future is trading at 50 cents, the market is telling you that it's even bet. When it goes to zero, it is essentially concluded it's impossible. For a long time, these online prediction markets were online sports betting, so tightly regulated as to be inaccessible to the average person in most of the United States. Though enterprising with gamblers would gain access to sites via VPNs. But after a series of ambiguous legal victories and the arrival of a friendlier presidential administration, they have leaped into the legal gray area and exploded not just in popularity, but in visibility as well. Their booster tells us grandly that the sum of all these bets gives our best forecast of the future, even a workable approximation of the truth. They also offer an unnerving implicit philosophy that we should relate to the future not as citizens or moralists, probably solvers or advocates, but as gamblers, each of us surveying the horizon of possibility, somewhat indifferent to human outcomes and looking instead for a betting edge. The markets don't concern any matters of grim geopolitical consequence, such as when Iran might lose control over Kyrgyzstan, when China might invade Taiwan, or how many different countries Israel will attack this month. No, they offer lighthearted action. Two, such as whether the vacuous YouTuber Mr. Beast will be a Democratic presidential nominee in 2028. He won't be legally eligible to run until 2036. Or about what words should be said in an episode of The Late Show, even after an interview in question had already been taped, about how the temperature will rise one day in Miami, or how much snow might accumulate the next day in Manhattan, or when the United States might confirm the existence of aliens, whether the price of Bitcoin will go up or down in the next 5 minutes, or whether Jesus Christ will return this calendar year. For most of last year, the price $1 future on that last question caught less than 4 cents, which means that the market gave less than 4% chance of the Lord's return. And in 2025, nearly $3.3 billion was spent on the possibility, small enough market, that most of the wagers were probably jokes and larks. Then suddenly in February, the odds jumped. That wasn't because there had been any big theological news, but because a secondary market had opened up in which people were gambling on which direction the odds in the eschatology, sorry, another new word for me, editorial comment, ESCHATOLOGY, eschatology. I have no idea what that means, but the eschatology market would move. It was easy enough to spend a little money betting on the odds in the first futures market and collecting as much bigger payoff in the second. And now there is almost $50 million riding on the chances of a second coming. On March 10th, the journalist Emmanuel Fabian, life blogging the Iran war for the Times of Israel, reported that a ballistic missile had struck near the city of Bet Shemesh, just outside Jerusalem. He soon began to receive a series of emails and messages, polite at first and threatening, life-threatening, imploring him to rewrite his story, to say that the missile had been intercepted overhead by an Israel rocket, with debris falling to the ground below. The issue, he wrote, in a terrifying account of the newspaper, was a polymarket future. Iran strikes Israel on. More than $14 million had bet on that happening March 19th, and an intercepted missile didn't count. You have no idea how much you put yourself at risk, one message. If you do not correct this by 1 o'clock at Israel time, you are bringing upon yourself damage you have never imagined you would suffer. It said you have already half an hour to correct your attempt at influence. Read another, you made a fatal mistake. You better respond to us, and I expect response from you within 9 minutes. Then 1 minute remains. He reached out to the police in Polymarket, which condemned the attempt at intimidation, posted on X that it banned the account for all involved, and will pass the info to relevant authorities. As Fabian pointed out in a kind of addendum on an Israel reserved in the civilian were indicted last month accused of using classified information to place bets about the country's 12-day war against Iran last June. Just as I'm reading this article in editorial comment, I'm a golden oldie and I have never purchased a lottery ticket. Okay, to continue, the long-term vision is to financialize everything, create a tradable asset out of any difference in opinion. Tarek Masir, the chief executive of another major prediction market, Kalshi, declared November, but who wants the future besides perhaps invertebrate gamblers and those people who profit from them? When people use the phrase casino economy, it isn't a term of praise, but rather a lamentation that is a healthier world, held together by thicker bonds, less inequality, and more evenly distributed opportunity. Fewer of us would feel that high-risk gamblers are the best chance of getting ahead. But moneyballing everything has produced an abundance of data on almost all subjects, from idle hands to play with, and when there are profits to be made, financialization is typically treated as a social inevitability. Some Americans flushed with stimulus checks spend the dynamic day trading. Some stocks and crypto, NFTs and SPACs, and the AI economy that followed is so highly leveraged on large language models that even some of the biggest boosters in the frontier labs have acknowledged that the moon looks like a bubble, though they might say a useful one. In this new era of gambling, the political context matters too. The Oval Office today is occupied for a second time by a failed casino magnate who famously declared bankruptcy on multiple ventures and then managed a high-stake, highly leveraged return. He's surrounded by family members and appointed officials comfortable with self-dealing side hustles. And it's not just the president, even leaders of the opposition have been reluctant to ban increasingly common stock trading by members of Congress. The rest of us now watch odd screen as Oscar and Grammy winners are announced, considering placing last-second bets when we might once have been crossing our finger about the $5 office pool, or perhaps naively cheering a personal favorite. On cable news, odds lifted from prediction markets are presented as the informational equivalent of polling results, often by newscasters employed by media organizations, now working in corporate partnership with these same betting sites. And in that effect of all this coverage, Kyla Scanlon has argued may be to undermine public deliberation by manufacturing a kind of premature consent, reporting about the prospect of, say, a military strike, though the prediction market odds that are treated objectively and immutable, rather than engaging in debate about whether the strike should happen. Sports, too, have been remade on demand gambling in ways once considered taboo. Just a few years ago, before sports betting was legalized in 2018, broadcasters were prohibited from mentioning betting lines. Now some podcasts drop out little else. Leagues back then wanted to avoid the taint of betting at almost any cost. Now they're in partnership with gambling apps. Before easy access casinos were installed on everyone's phone, Americans could still engage with sports as an escapist pastime, mixing aspects of low-stake tribal conflict and periodic collective exultation. Now, even on Super Bowl Sunday, we engage with those same events less as a strange secular religion and more as if we are sitting in front of a slot machine, experiencing an entirely different game that are even the loved ones sitting right beside us in identical jerseys, but staring down at their phones and monitor their various parlays. Estimates suggest that in 22, Americans gamble the equivalent of nearly 4% of the gross domestic product and last more than 10% of that many on those bets. Half of all men between the age of 18 and 49 have an active online sports betting account. And though surveys are rarely reliable about these things, 1/4 of sports bettors report that unable to pay bills because of money lost on gambling. A 2024 report from research at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst suggested that 90% of the state's gambling revenue came from at-risk and problem gamblers. That's worth repeating. 90% of the gambling revenue came from at-risk problem, meaning people who shouldn't gamble and maybe can't pay bills. So, it's an addiction like tobacco or alcohol. This is a power law familiar with other pastimes, and Americans urged to category vice in the course of legalization and destigmatization. The cost of legalization have proved is distressingly familiar. In just a few years, the rise of betting apps has produced big spikes on personal bankruptcy and big drops in personal credit ratings. And on days when there are big upsets, a measurable and horrifying uptick in domestic violence. The legalization of online gambling increased the population level risk of bankruptcy by 25%. According to one scholarship paper, according to another, households and frequently bet reduce their investments after legalization. According to a third, legalization led to reduced savings. It appears to have made binge drinking among young men worse as well. Can Mamdani get the big stuff done at this intense pace? The New York's mayor's long hours show that generational change actually looks like. Mayor Zohran Mamdani was on his way to Gracie Mansion this winter when he asked his driver to pull over to help fellow New Yorkers digging their cars out of the snow. He picked up a shovel. So did his press secretary. Members of security detail, too. It was just the kind of scene that endeared Mr. Mamdani, 34, to voters. It also hinted at a governing style that resembles the scrappy, high-octane feel of a political campaign and relies on the hustle of a group of young staff members to keep up. Mr. Mamdani, New York City youngest mayor in about a century, has filled City Hall with people who are also in their 30s or even younger. The mayor's chief of staff, El Bizard Church, is 34. His communications director, Anna Barr, is 33. Joe Calvello, his press secretary, 33. His closest outside advisor, Morris Katz, is 26. He is so young that for several months last year he told reporters he was a couple of years older than he was. The arrival of these young Democrats at the helm of one of the most prominent offices in the country has meant all kinds of changes in New York politics, from the congressional primaries in which Mr. Mamdani has involved himself to who holds the political capital in New York. Then there's a way they run the government with a management style their youth allows. Working all the time. Mr. Mamdani is younger than most prominent Democrats, needs little sleep, enjoys working weekends, and likes to be highly visible in the city he leads, like every day. Some of his closest aides haven't had a day off since January 1, when the mayor was sworn into office. Work calls begin as late as 10 p.m. Some veterans say the approach is notably intense, like Karen Hinton, who was Mayor Bill de Blasio's press secretary, and said she struggled to imagine her former boss shoveling snow. He wouldn't have gotten out of his car, she said. He would have called someone. Mr. Mamdani's administration offers among the first looks at the generational change coming, slowly, finally, to leadership in politics and other key American institutions beyond it. His 2025 campaign, both in policy and in messaging, has already influenced Democratic politics. If he is successful, politicians on both parties may seek to replicate his governing style. Some of the staff member ideas are novel, like the full newspaper front page that Ace prepared as a gift for President Trump, meant to evoke the New York tabloids that helped launch Mr. Trump's political career. Several people have told me that the charm offense was the idea of Mr. Barr, but when asked, she said it was a team effort. Either way, the gamut led to the release of a Columbia University student, Elma Aghayawaya, who had been detained by federal immigration officials earlier this year. But as with management style, the culture Mr. Mamdani is building at City Hall comes with some possible blind spots and potential trade-offs. One question is whether there are enough people in City Hall with the confidence that years of experience can bring to know when to tell the mayor no. Several people told me this role is primarily filled by Dean Fulaban, Mr. Mamdani's 75-year-old first deputy mayor. The influence of younger people at City Hall also brought shifts in policy that would have been unthinkable under earlier mayors, from views on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to issues closer to home. For instance, Mr. Mamdani's aides are actually acutely aware of the cost of rent, a good thing since 2/3 of residents are renters, but sometimes appear less attuned to the concern of the homeowners. There are few black people among the senior staffers in City Hall, which is a serious problem. There were no black deputy mayors until March 19th, when Mr. Mamdani put Renetta Francois in charge of a new office focused on mental health and safety. About 1 in 5 New Yorkers is non-Hispanic. Black. I'll repeat that. About 1 in 5 New Yorkers is non-Hispanic black. And black Americans make up the heart of the Democratic base as well as an important part of the culture of New York. They're also being priced out of the city in disproportionate numbers and face a myriad other challenges, including higher unemployment and lower reading proficiency rates in the city's public schools. Representation is the only measure of commitment, and Mr. Mamdani has been vocal about these issues. His decision to roll out his child care initiative in high poverty areas, like, for instance, the Brownsville section of Brooklyn, which is heavily black, is encouraging, and his poll numbers among black voters are strong. But for black Americans who have faced a long history of exclusion, a seat at the table still matters. A generational change in government gets underway nationally. There are likely to be some practical concerns, too. The 30 and 20-something around Mr. Mamdani, most of whom may yet to do their demanding jobs in a period of major crisis such as the COVID-19 pandemic, will have to learn how to pace themselves, not even 100 days into administration, relentless as some running on fumes. Most of them don't seem to mind. Mr. Mamdani tends to inspire loyalty. Many of the people surrounding the mayor are also avowed progressives who seek his morality as a chance to carry out an agenda which they are fiercely committed. In a rare bright spot in a national landscape dominated by far-right political policies and ideas. Would you rather a mayor who does 11 p.m. press conference or the one who's at the gym at 11 a.m.? Mr. Mamdani's senior communications advisor, Monica Klein, 36, asked me in a text message when I asked how much sleep she was getting. Ms. Klein also referred to her previous boss, Mr. de Blasio, who lived at Gracie Mansion on Manhattan's Upper East Side, put Drew Iyer for working out at YMCA in Park Slope often mid-morning. As they were during the breakout campaign last year, the millennial mayor and his millennial and Gen Z aides are in constant contact with New Yorkers across social media platforms, but they are spending even more time barnstorming the city with in-person events, a nod to the growing sense of urgency among younger generations to get offline and rebuild connections and community. Mr. Mamdani likes to work in person, often dropping in on the bullpen to check with aides. He's also constantly coming up with new ideas that lead to more work, like going bowling on a Saturday with members of a nurse union to celebrate their new labor contract. He frequently communicates with his staff members chat on Microsoft Teams. Working at City Hall has always involved long hours and a certain kind of intensity. Accordingly, the top jobs tend to attract a certain type of individual. Stu Lesser, New York City longest-serving press secretary, says his schedule during those days, including a nap between 7:30 and 9:30, after putting his infant daughter to bed, rising to work again until midnight, then sleeping before briefing his boss, Mayor Michael Bloomberg, in the 6 a.m. hour. I was dying. You should be killing yourself, Mark also served as Mr. Bloomberg's press secretary told me. Number of days in office is your biggest piece of capital. You run out of time on everything, Mr. Lavorna said. The maverick group of young politicals running the city also come to find that personally engaging in every minute detail of municipal government and with equal ferocity can make it harder to deliver on the big promise. Those promises are what got Mr. Mamdani elected, and they electrified the younger and more progressive part of the Democratic base, far beyond New York City. Mr. Mamdani is trying to enact a sweeping leftist agenda in a moment when trust in government is exceedingly low. He is the city's first Muslim mayor, and he came to office promising to champion working people in a moment when those Americans are struggling. This may be why this mayor seems to approach everything he does with a sense of urgency. It seems like Mr. Mamdani is everywhere. It's because he is. So are his exhausted staffers. It's a group of young and hungry progressives out to prove to voters that the left can govern. Pax Americana meet Lex Americana. We had a good run, some 8 decades or so, but it's clear by now the United States has ceased to be the leader of the free world. A successor for that post has not been named, and it appears unlikely that the European Union or NATO or whatever constitutes the West these days will promote from within. The job might even be eliminated. One more reduction in force courtesy of President Trump. Rather than leading the free world, the United States is striding across the globe, seemingly free of restraint, forethought, or strategy, exerting its power because it can. In a matter of months, the Trump administration has captured Venezuela, president, and tossed him in jail in Brooklyn, and has pummeled Iran's theocratic leadership in a war that is ricocheting across the Middle East and upending the global economy. Now the president says he will have the honor of taking Cuba next. Cuba, in his second term, is like Michael Corleone in The Godfather, settling all the family's business. Huh. Nearly 2 decades ago, Fareed Zakaria, the international affairs columnist, published a best-selling book called The Post-American World that predicted the United States' relative decline versus other economically ascendant countries, what he called the rise of the rest. Senator Barack Obama was soon seen carrying the book around during his first presidential campaign, affirming the volume's elite ways. The United States would remain militarily and economically preeminent, Zakaria argued, but it could take on a new political role, a sort of chairman of the board for the planet, relying on consultation, cooperation, and even compromise. Under Trump, the idea of U.S. leadership has indeed been remade, but from authority to domination, from persuasion to bullying, from nurturing alliance to wrecking them. Consultation, cooperation, and compromise have yet to join the coalition. We don't need anybody peeved, Trump said this month, when European leaders initially declined to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz. We're the strongest nation in the world. We have the strongest military by far. We don't need them. Launching a war with only one ally and then expecting everyone else to fall in line is a perfect example of the tensions inherent in America's new approach. The United States wants the benefit of hegemony, but without accepting the responsibilities, ensuring collective security, promoting economic openness, nurturing vital alliances that come with it. Trump doesn't care to be a superpower. He just likes to wield superpower. He wants to operate in the world constrained only by my own morality and my own mind, as he told the Times recently. What does that mean for America's role and purpose in a world that has been too long defined by what it is not, the post-Cold War era? It means what we once called Pax Americana, that a U.S.-led system of alliances and institutions that promoted American interests and values that helped avoid major conflicts in the decades after World War II is gone, and irretrievably so. In places of the Pax Americana, we are seeing a sort of Pax Americana, a world in which a careless and uninhibited and injurious U.S. superpower struts across the chessboard, threatening old friends and enabling old rivals, seeking short-term gains, heedless of the dangers it's creating for itself and for the world. This is historical aberration, a superpower that freely abdicates its leadership role, because it has concluded that leadership is for suckers, one that no longer promotes its values, because it's decided that these values are fake anyway, one that gave up on the rules and institutions it spent so long building, because it assumes they're no longer worth the hassle. If Washington sometimes still imagines itself the leader of the free world, that is because it is rethinking who belongs in that world, and because it is defining downward what it means to lead. To better understand how this new America is operating, I went back to the last major transition, when we were shifting from a Cold War stalemate to a period of unrivaled U.S. primary, and revisited some of the influential books and essays that tried to glimpse what was coming. Prominent among these is The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers by Paul Kennedy, the Yale historian, which was published in 1987 and quickly became one of the sacred texts of American decline. Through the normal run of history, Kennedy wrote, great powers typically relinquish global leadership unwillingly, whether losing a major conflict against an upstart rival, missing out on some transformative technological innovation, often in the military realm, or eroding economically to the point that the burden of hegemony becomes too much to bear. Kennedy warned of what he called important overreach, and he argued that the sum of total United States global interest and obligation is nowadays far larger than the country's power to defend them all simultaneously. A superpower that wishes to retain its status usually needs to accomplish three hard things, Kennedy said, and it must do them all at once. First, provide and pay for military security both for itself and its allies. Second, satisfy the economic needs of its population, not to mention its desires. And third, ensure enough long-term economic growth that it can keep stockpiling guns and churning butter. Achieving all these three of those feats over a sustained period of time will be very difficult, Kennedy argued. Yet achieving the first two feats, or either one of them without the third, will inevitably lead to relative eclipse over the longer term. That has been the fate of such great power, such as Imperial Spain, Napoleonic France, British Empire, when it gave way to the United States after World War II. An American president who both boasts that his military assault on Iran could go on forever and tells his nation's children to settle for $2 instead of $30 is exemplifying Kennedy's argument. Uneven rates of economic growth would sooner or later lead to shifts in the world's political and military balance, Kennedy wrote. Put simply, powers don't last on the cheap. In this light, Trump's fixation on how America is getting ripped off by the rest of the world, whether through trade deficits, loss of manufacturing, insufficient military spending by NATO, is not just the mantra of a real estate guy obsessed with negotiating a better deal. It is also the resentment that dominates power is always toward weaker ones. Robert Gilpin, International Relations theorist, explained war and changes in world politics. His classic 1981 study of what makes hegemons come and go. The Athenians wanted their allies to provide more resources in defense against the Persians. The British wanted their rambunctious American colonists to pony up for the fights against the Indians and the French, though excessive taxes on the colonies eventually backfired. And both the Soviet Union and the United States wanted their respective client states to share the cost of the Cold War, because the dominant power will defend the status quo in its own interest. For Trump, the problem with leading the free world is the free world gets a free ride. You have been listening to a reading of articles and features from Sunday, March 29th. Issue of the New York Times opinion section. We read from the New York Times opinion section every Sunday at 2 p.m. Your reader has been Dick Shanley, and thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the New York Times Arts and Leisure section, followed at 4 by a rebroadcast of this morning's Buffalo News. Please stay for these readings and more throughout the day, and feel free to contact us with your comments, suggestions, with any questions you may have. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes